In this video, I'm going to take a dive into the soothing but uber cool sound of Bossa Nova, the close cousin of samba and one of Brazil's most iconic musical styles. Picture those long sandy beaches of Rio, sipping a caipirinha, Sugarloaf Mountain, you get the idea. So whether you're looking to add some Latin rhythms to your locker or develop your chord vocabulary and knowledge of harmony, this style has an incredible amount to offer whatever your level. My name's Steve Walsworth, let's dive in. When I was about 12 and first starting out on the guitar, my only real knowledge of Bossa Nova was the preset on my old Casio keyboard. So I thought it was that terrible music that you only hear in supermarkets and lifts. Now fast forward a few years to when I first learned the girl from Ipanema, and this opened up a whole new world of cool rhythms and colourful chords. João Gilberto is considered the godfather and pioneer of Bossa Nova, and apparently spent several months in the 1950s in his sister's bathroom honing his iconic guitar technique as an interpretation of samba rhythms. So a lot of it is looking at the guitar as a percussion instrument itself. So a lot of those loud carnival instruments, surdo, agogo, pandero, tamborim, have been translated onto the softer nylon strings of the classical guitar, alongside the harmonic backdrop of 1940s swing jazz. Our first foray into this style is the basic bossa pattern as heard on Gilberto's song Insensatez. So this is all about the thumb laying down a constant pulse whilst the fingers play the upper harmony. Try to think of these as two separate parts, with the thumb never moving away from that basic pulse, and the fingers can play any number of different rhythmic variations, syncopation and so forth over the top. So this is a crucial first step in gaining some independence between the thumb and fingers, and this will become even more important when we start to improvise later on. A couple of things to note here, and the first is the basic classical technique where we're pivoting from the end of the thumb and not the middle joint, and that the fingers, when we play them, are actually moving into the palm. The second thing is the chord that we're using here, a C6-9. This is a great alternative to a C major 7 chord and almost ubiquitous in Bossa Nova. Now an interesting thing happens when we play a C6-9 but we change the bass note to a G. This can be thought of as a couple of different ways. One, as a G6-9 itself, so the 6th and the 9th swap round, or we can think of it as a C6-9 with a 5th in the bass. Now this is something that we're going to dig into much more later on. Now if you want to stretch your chord playing a little bit further, here's a really nice descending idea in the key of C that uses that same rhythmic pattern. So the next step is to introduce a typical 2-bar pattern where we've got a little bit more syncopation. Now you might find it helpful at this stage to vocalise the underlying 16th note grid. Now I'd personally recommend anything other than our standard 1 Iana, 2 Iana, 3 Iana, 4 Iana. This, to me, doesn't feel or sound natural. Now, I use a slight variation of what's known as the Godali method, where we say a ta on a down and a ka on an off. Taka 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 taka. Now you can't see it, but I'm also tapping my foot on that pulse. So you're always getting that taka 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 taka. All of this is super important and really helps to develop that sense of independence between the various limbs in the body. Practice clapping these rhythms in the shower, walking down the street, on the bus, whatever. I promise you it will get easier over time. So let's spice this up with some typical jazz harmony. This is really just a variation of C major 7, A minor 7, D minor 7, and G7, a 1, 6, 2, 5. Those upper extensions give it a bit more of a sophisticated character, but the voice leading, that's the internal movement of the harmony played by the fingers, sounds smoother and more musical. If you're enjoying this video, then you can really help support the channel by giving it a like and subscribe. The next step is all about harmonic anticipation, and this is a crucial concept in a lot of Brazilian music. We're going to be playing the second chord slightly early, just before the downbeat in bar 2. It will go like so. Now we can also make a slight Gilberto tweak to the rhythm and also add some muting with the fingers. Here we're just using the underlying 16th note grid to help with this muting technique on those fingers. Now we can of course apply this to our 1-6-2-5 chord progression from before, but here's a nice little variation on that descending idea that we had earlier on. Here we're going to introduce some alternating bass note movement. We're still maintaining that quarter note pulse with the thumb, but this time we're moving between root and fifth. This works particularly well for fifth string root chords. So for example, that C6-9. We can do dominant 9, minor 9, dominant 7 sharp 9, even half diminished. The only slight tweak we've got there is that we're going to the flattened fifth and not the perfect fifth. Now this isn't always practical. For example, if we go up to the A7 sharp 5, to get up to that F is almost impossible. So what you'll find yourself doing is mixing this up a little bit as you're going through any chord progression. Another relatively simple trick is to reverse our 2-bar rhythm, and this takes us closer to a samba pattern. Now this means starting on an offbeat pickup. Now this can intuitively be a lot more difficult to feel, so it's really worth spending the time vocalizing and clapping those rhythms like we did earlier on. Gilberto's variation that you can hear extensively in the song Wave flips that 2-bar rhythm that we had earlier on. So here's a nice little example which descends all the way through down to an F major 7 chord. You might notice in this example that there are a few extra little ghost notes on the thumb. Now we're not altering the basic quarter note pulse which we've talked about throughout this entire lesson. We're just adding a few little ghost notes to create a little bit more of a bounce. So sometimes it's like a muted ghost note, sometimes it's an open string, so you get this kind of idea. Now the ultimate goal is to play any of these different variations and improvise with them at will over any chord progression. Obviously easier said than done. But I'd definitely recommend the Latin Real Book because it's got a lot of the classic Bossa Nova tunes in it. As always, the tab and backing tracks are available on my support page, links are down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Obrigado!